So, good morning. This is Kelly Woods up in Anacortes, Washington. And today I have my good friend and colleague Roger Moore joining us. He's down in the Palm Springs area of California. And our topic today is going to be on hypnosis for end of life issues. So, welcome, Roger. It's so good to see you.
Thank you, Kelly, and it's just such an honor for me to be here and with you and all the women of Hypnotic Women. So thank you.
You're welcome. Just to let our audience know, you and I have collaborated in the past on this topic. I think it both caught our attention about the same time, and we both work in the area of cancer care, helping patients who are undergoing treatment or who have already been through treatment. And for me, during during those sessions, occasionally I unfortunately lost clients, and so it started becoming apparent to me that I needed some more skills in this area. I needed to personally get more comfortable with it, but also have some resources. And and how did you gravitate towards doing more research in end of life?
Well, it started years ago with clients dying from cancer or other diseases, other illnesses, and I was grappling with how to best be there for them and for their family members, and just floundering around in the dark, wondering what do I do here? How do I do this? And that's when I started looking at trainings and what was available and how to put something together. And you pointed out doula givers to me, and it was kind of like magic after that. So,
Yeah, this was actually several years ago, and I think it was the wave had already started here nationally uh, about bringing death topics out of the closet, so to speak. And Suzanne O'Brien, who is an oncology nurse, had created her doula givers project and course, and so then you and I hosted her in the Seattle area for
yeah.
that 3-day training for the public. And that was phenomenal. I learned so much during that, just personally. And, I think that some hypnotists might wonder if they're not doing medical hypnosis and not working, in conjunction with a cancer care clinic, for example, why should they learn this stuff?
Well, Kelly, yeah, there's actually I just checked the clock. There's a baby boomer death clock, and as of a few minutes ago, there's 64,547,259,000 of us baby boomers alive, and there's a death every 18 seconds. Today alone, there's going to be 4,800 deaths, and we're going to be extinct by 2086. So odds are that every single hypnotherapist is going to have one of their clients end up at end of life. They may be there for weight loss, or they may be there to stop smoking or to deal with a fear or phobia and then get a diagnosis that they don't have long to live. And I would hope that people would want to be able to, if not offer the services, know how to best support and direct them towards the services.
I think that's a great point. You'd also mentioned caregivers, family members of people who are at end of life. So, how often do you work with these folk?
I always try to have, the significant family member or caregiver in the office or in the room with the person at end of life, because I want to be teaching the caregiver, the partner, the spouse, the son or daughter. I want to be teaching them the skills so that they can best support the client, and
Okay.
helping the client relax, or helping the client with managing their pain, and also helping them feel safe and know how to have the conversation about the fact that I'm dying.
And I think this is really at the crux of a lot of the end of life conversations And of course, there are so many different formats for it. There are death dinners, there's death cafes. There are all these amazing creative ways to encourage people to get more comfortable talking about what has historically been an uncomfortable topic, especially in our country. And you had mentioned helping these people feel safe in having these conversations. Interesting. I've also found that people who are at end of life don't necessarily feel safe talking to their family members or loved ones. And so to be able to do that privately with us is of great relief. They're able to really go places where maybe they don't want to put the burden on those family members, or it just adds, they perceive that it might add to their stress. What do you think about that?
Well, as when I was a kid, um, death was a fairly common topic in our household. I remember when my great mother grandmother died, um, her body was brought to our house, and family came to our home, to our living room, and visited. The funeral actually took place in the church, but it was just a very common thing. And today, that's just barely starting to surface as options again, that can be done. Our culture doesn't want to talk about death. It's not a fun thing to talk about, and it's avoided. And
Yeah.
so,
And so what are typical fears that a person would have at end of life?
well, just the fear of death, and what does death mean? Is there a God? What if there isn't? Often it's about pain, often about dying alone. The fears are pretty much endless. And what I find is when somebody tries to talk to their partner, their son, their daughter, whoever it is, about death, the response is often, "Oh, you're going to be okay. Just think positively, or pray and God will heal you, or whatever," and they get dismissed, and
Yeah.
they don't get to talk about what's really on their mind and how they're feeling.
I agree. And so that is stifling to them. It's limiting to them. And one of the problems with even being in denial of the fact that we're all going to die, and in fact, we're all dying every day, right?
Right.
Is that especially at end of life, then a person denies themselves the chance to have these wonderful conversations, or maybe to resolve, issues with people, or to be able to explore and find meaning in their life. They're just shutting down that way. And that takes a lot of energy too, energy that might be spent otherwise.
Yeah.
So it's so wonderful to create that safe space and to encourage those conversations. Now, I think it can be tricky too, because if a person is in denial and they come to us and they have strong belief or hope that they're going to recover, but it becomes more and more apparent that that's not the case, is it our job to point out to them that they're dying,
Oh,
or that
absolutely not.
they're
Absolutely not.
terminal?
Absolutely
Right.
not.
Yeah.
Our job is to support them where they are, to enter their world, enter their reality, and offer the support, and really truly hear and listen what their goals are. I had a woman in December, and got a call from her husband, um, desperate. She wasn't eating. The doctor talked to the doctor a couple days before, and a concierge doctor that does a lot of compassionate choices work, and anyway, the husband just so desperately wanted hypnosis for his wife so she could eat and keep food down, and so that she would live to the end of the month, because by the end of December there was some miracle cure that was going to be available to her. And so we set up the session. Daughter was in the hospital room, sat on the bed holding a laptop, and so was daughter. And the woman and myself there in the hospital, and I, long distance. And it was very apparent to me, just having been around a while, that she probably wasn't going to make it to the end of the month.
Mhm.
And while those were the words she had, that she spoke about wanting to live and wanting to eat and make it through, I didn't hear it from her. It was like those were her husband's words; those weren't her words. And I just asked, what is your goal? What would you most like to get out of this? And she said, I just want peace.
Mm.
She said, I honestly, I don't care whether it's peace with dying or peace with living. I just want peace. And that's where we focused. And she passed
Right.
her teeth.
And hypnosis is a fantastic
Oh, yeah,
modality
yeah,
for bringing a sense of peace to a person, no matter what's going on in their life,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
think when we think about the actual applications of our work towards someone who is suffering an illness and is dealing with the pain, the physical pain of it, the emotional pain, the sense of loss, and the fear and anxiety about what is yet to come, there are so many things that we can do to ease that suffering. And just like the story that you just told us, sometimes the hope there is based on someone else's hope,
yes,
that
yeah,
they're not ready to let go. And I totally understand that. And that might be a great chance to offer a session to that family member
right, yeah,
to ease their suffering. But one of our favorite slogans was coined by, well, maybe not coined, but he certainly used it a lot, by Michael Elner, is hope is realistic.
yes, it is, yeah,
Sometimes we get clients coming to us who are facing these life-threatening illnesses, and they are hoping for a cure from hypnosis because they've heard about all the miracles that
right,
hypnosis can do. And you and I have seen some of that magic too, haven't we? Like
yeah.
these amazing turnarounds where people are given 6 months to live and they're still kicking, right?
I
But
have one woman that I've worked with about 12 years now, and she was still has cancer, but she was told she had 6 months 18 years ago.
yeah, that's quite, and so while that could be quite a claim for hypnosis, but we know that there are several things in play there.
Yeah,
I have a client that I work with every now and then who got a pretty serious short-term edict that he wasn't going to be around for very long with prostate cancer, and he's still working. And it's been about 3 years now and doing fine. He comes in every now and then because some of the treatment has pretty much chemically castrated him, and that certainly is a loss for him. And he likes to use hypnosis to reduce that. So how how do you use hope then in a realistic way so that we're not in danger of giving false hope to these clients?
well, with this woman, she said that she just wanted peace. And so I had her tell me what peace meant to her. What did it look like? What did it feel like? And that got us into hope and hoping for that peace. And she just wanted mental emotional peace and for her body to be at ease. And when she was able to create some relief just in that session and help her body relax, she's that's when she actually started talking about hope. She said, "Oh, this is so hopeful," and we
That's wonderful
went with that.
because
Uh, yeah,
that makes space within her, and the energy that she was spending trying to get that peace um, is better used towards
yeah,
thinking about hope and the different ways that hope can arrive. I know you and I have talked about this in the past where hope might be a day without pain,
yep,
or it might be seeing a grandson, right? Or it can come in these short term, wonderful, sweet moments for a person. I, I think it's really one of the things that I learned from the doula giver training was how to assess where a person is. Now, sometimes we can see, like you did with that distance client, you could see what condition she was in, but it's not always apparent. And how do we assess what stage of dying a person is in? Because there's Suzanne has clarified 3 different stages. Can you talk about that with us?
Well, there's the shock phase, the stabilization phase, and the last one she talks about is transition phase. And and it's not like somebody moves step one and then okay, now it's step two and now it's step three. My experience is that often they're in all three at once, and it's just kind of the pendulum swing, and sometimes they're more about handling the things that need to be handled towards the end of life, but the shock that they're about to die is still very present. But the shock phase is that usually that initial awareness of, they've just had the diagnosis or whatever, you're dying, you're at the end of life.
Yeah, I'm gonna use a personal example. My father, he's 91 and has enjoyed a wonderful, healthy, marvelous life. I about 2 years ago got his diagnosis of COPD, and so that was his shock phase. He
Yep.
knew something had been going on. He'd been coughing, but to actually get this diagnosis, and there were some pretty severe uh, predictions that came along with it. And I think that was really where the shock came from, knowing that it was not going to improve, or so he was told, and that he would eventually die a painful death, that he would basically suffocate. So from there, he moved into that middle stage of stabilization, treating it with inhalers with medication and a bit of anxiety medication, which he'd never experienced anxiety in his life. So the first time he had an anxiety attack, he really did think he was dying. And so did my mother.
I'm sure.
It was so rare for them. But COPD patients often have that reaction. You can imagine you don't get air.
Right. Yeah.
That's a pretty scary thing, and it triggers the nervous system to move into that. So now things have been progressively worsening. While he's still in this stabilization stage, things are getting worse, and he's kind of shutting down energetically and withdrawing into himself more. So at some point, it'll be clear that a transition is towards death is happening. And how will we recognize that? How will he know that? Is
You
it
know,
different for everybody?
I think it's different for everybody. Uh, I think people know when that happens intuitively. I've heard different, clients that'll come in and they're in that stabilization phase, and and then next session or the next time we meet, whatever, they're talking differently. The end is near.
Yeah, I think also one of the signs that I learned about is that they pretty much quit eating. And and a mistake that caregivers will give is to keep feeding them, especially I could see my mother doing this with my father. He really has preferred her food over anyone else's his whole life. And I could see her think, I'll just make his favorite food and he'll eat it. And this could not only is it stressful for that patient, but it could be dangerous because that means that, the body is starting to shut down. Whoops, we kind of lost our sound here for Roger now. So I'm just going to talk. Uh, Gila had asked a great question. She asked, oh, now we're getting you back, Roger. Can you hear me? No. Um, I think I can hear you, Roger. Oh, now your
Okay,
mic
can you
came.
hear me?
Okay, now you're back on.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I was just talking about how the digestive system is shutting down, the internal organs are probably shutting down, and so and the reason I bring this up is what if we have a spouse ask us to help their dying partner improve their appetite, and yet they're in this phase of transition. So we need to be cognizant of that might be going on.
And that was very much with the case with the woman that I was talking about earlier in December. Yeah, the husband was desperate to keep her alive, and I
Yeah,
didn't hear that from her.
that's interesting, isn't it? And a lot of people come to a place of acceptance on their own. They might come to that with our work if that's something they're asking about. But that's why it's really important for us to be able to assess and prioritize what people need, even
Yes.
as they move through these. And I've had young people die, which is very difficult to be part of, but it's also such an honor to play that role for them. And families are very appreciative too, because it does release some of the burden from these family members. They're using so much energy just to deal with their own feelings and logistics of what's going on. So, um, Gila had asked a question. Have you ever been asked to help a client future pace their death experience? Do you want to share any stories about that or?
Yes. Well, you introduced me to the death rehearsal, and which to me is just a most beautiful experience. And I will often, somewhere in conversation with clients, just mention that maybe they might be interested, and just talk a little bit about what it is. And uh, sometimes I'm asked, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it's, oh, let's do it now, and sometimes it's a month later. But it's people. We'll talk about how do you envision your death? What would that be like? And then we use hypnosis and go on a journey, and I lead a little bit. I will often just let them take over in their privacy of their own mind. Sometimes they're talking to me during the whole process and telling me all about the experience. Sometimes they're totally silent and choose to share it with me afterwards, and sometimes they choose not to share it with me, but it's all good. But it's just a great way to create a positive future fantasy. Uh,
Absolutely. And Deborah asked a great question. She said, would you do the death rehearsal with a spouse present?
yes.
Okay. I never have. I don't think I would object though. I remember the first time that I ever did it. It was before I even knew it was a thing, right? It's because with these great creative minds, and it just kind of occurred to me that okay, I know what this person needs, and this was with a cancer care client who was undergoing her second bout with cancer. She had previously overcome breast cancer, and she was in her 70s, and she was at the point where she was home, and she lived alone. Her neighbor knew me and called me in because she was having a lot of discomfort and also anxiety, and she at this point had oral cancer, and she'd had surgery and radiation, and she decided to opt out on further treatment, and it was pretty miserable. She had like half of her jaw removed at that point. And we had a couple of sessions about a week apart, which really did help increase her comfort. And so we had some good rapport going. And on my third visit with her, she she said to me that, well, what I'm really afraid of is that God will not accept me into the kingdom of heaven. And I said, okay, what is this belief based on? And she said, well, I haven't been a very nice person in this life. And it was true. She had alienated all of her family members. Her kids wouldn't talk to her. I don't know what she did. I didn't really need to know the details. It's none of my business. But that's when this idea came to me that, well, if this is a belief, why don't we just check it out? And of course, this could be risky, right? If she
Yeah.
believed it, then maybe she would find that rejection. But I was willing to take that chance. And so I guided her through a death rehearsal with her permission ahead of time. And following which, she didn't speak during it. Near the end of it, it was about a 15-minute experience. Tears came out of her eyes, and when she opened her eyes, she just looked glowing.
Yeah.
It was such a change. Roger, I said this before. I've got to figure out how to get away with taking before and
I
after
know. I
photographs,
know. I know.
making people feel self-conscious, because it was such an amazing transformation in this woman. It was like she had left all of her fear wherever she went. And she did tell me, she said, he forgives me and he's waiting for me.
Awesome. Yeah.
And she died 3 days after that. But, my neighbor told her that those 3 days had her in just a place of peace and comfort, that she just kind of floated through them. And I know it was because of that experience. Whatever
Yeah.
she had there, whatever conversation she had with God in that session was transforming for her. And so it can be really marvelous. I would imagine, there are some rules. We don't want to just throw this willy nilly at
Nope.
anybody, right? To suggest it to someone who is still in denial that they're dying would not be a good thing. But I like the way you did it. You just kind of offer it as a possibility. That's what I say too if I sense this, as someone who might be nearing the end of their life. And I think also it's so important to work in a client-centered manner and not exert our own belief systems.
Right. And in
That,
response
yeah,
to just furthermore on Deborah's comment or question,
yeah,
the partner or husband, son, daughter, whatever that's wife that's present, one is it's always up to the client. Do you want to invite them in? I make it very okay with me. It's their choice, their decision.
mhm,
And sometimes I've had the person ask them to leave during a session because they would just wanted to talk more privately. And often they want them there to stay for the whole thing. So
right.
that's a client choice, not my choice.
Yeah, I like that, and I work the same way, and even with kids. I,
Yeah.
young kids usually want their parents around, but teenagers are often opting for that privacy factor. So, um, one topic that goes around in our circles, because we have a lot of people who are into holistic practice, that maybe aren't great advocates of conventional medical treatments, for example. Should we be judging or trying to influence a client's choices when it comes to treatment?
No, never. Um, my job is again to find out where they are, what they want, and support them in that, not to say you should do chemo or you shouldn't do chemo. It's support them in their choices. The where I draw the line is if somebody wants to come to me for a magic cure or fix, and I'm very clear I don't do that.
Yeah,
I'm not going to wave the magic pendulum in front of you and promise you'll be cured of cancer. Um, and
yeah.
I won't go there with them.
And I think this is where language is crucial. And this is really where language will keep us within scope of practice, not using the word cure.
Yeah,
Now, healing can come in many forms. So, helping a person heal from the past, helping a person heal relationships with self or others.
yep.
They're, inspiring healing within the body. This is all completely different than, claiming cures with hypnosis. And I think this is so important.
And along with that, I'm always talking about that my work is in support of their ongoing health care, not instead
Yeah.
of.
And so how specifically can we support, let's say somebody is undergoing cancer treatment. You know, I had a fellow who lived on one of the islands here, and his wife contacted me because he was having a lot of nausea from his cancer treatment, and so that's why she reached out. She had heard that hypnosis could help. So in that case, hypnosis was very effective in reducing his nausea and his anxiety related
Yeah.
to to his treatment. He subsequently died, but I know that that last month or so, he was much more comfortable than he
Right.
would have been without um, my my input there, without our work together. So how else can we complement and work as part of an integrative team with treatments that people are doing, or even approaches like you're pretty much an expert in nutrition, and so how can hypnosis help a person in that area?
Well, it's depending on what stage they're in of like cancer treatment. If they're in the very, very early stages, uh, I'll talk to them about what healthy eating is and how that will help support their body in making it through the chemo, through the radiation in recovery.
Mhm. Okay.
If we're in the acceptance phase, where that transition phase, and then it's more about just eating comfortably and being able to eat and keep the food down and um, feel the best they can feel.
Right. Okay. So there, we know that just like for so many of our clients that come for things like sleep issues, um, stress, excess stress, or anxiety, or even, you know, not just physical pain, but emotional pain, all of these are often requests that end of life people might be having, right?
Right. Yep.
So many of the viewers here already have the skills to help um, these clients improve this chapter of life. And I think this is really the crux of what the end of life movement is trying to do: is how do we find meaning during this phase of life, whether it lasts for a week or months or years? And our question here is, how does hypnosis come into play? What can we offer specifically? What are your thoughts?
Well, you touched on something just a moment ago of, or everybody here, I I suspect, I believe, already has all the skills, the hypnosis skills and tools they need to do this work, because it's really not about the skills and tools. Okay. The biggest thing that you need is to listen, and the person before you is going to tell you what it is they need. And so I'm madly taking notes during the session. Was they're telling me, talking with me, I want their words, I want their phrases, so that I can feed that back to them and create that space of healing, the mental, emotional, physical healing, using their words, their phrases.
I think this is so important that we utilize, because the client brings the script to us, don't they?
Right, they do. Yeah.
And I recall I was contacted by a gentleman who was in a assisted living place with his wife. They had an apartment there, and she had um, dementia and some moments of lucidity. But of course, uh, that creates a conflict because they're not really able to give consent, or maybe even participate in hypnosis. But I did come to visit, and the reason that he needed help is that she had a lot of physical pain, and she was fighting off receiving any medications from the nursing staff. And the pain would spike at night, keeping them both awake. And so he was exhausted. She was exhausted. He was hoping I could hypnotize her, uh, hypnotize the pain away for her. And I realized that wasn't really going to be an option. But I did engage in conversation with her,
Hmm.
and she started telling me all about their honeymoon.
Okay.
60 years prior, it was in Hawaii. I would have loved to have been in Hawaii 60 years ago. I bet it was something else. And she gave me so much fodder that I ended up making a recording based on that. And every night he would put that recording on and they both listened to it and they fell asleep and slept all night long. So there are many different ways to
Yeah.
address this. And I think that she lived for another couple of months, but those months were peaceful for both of them.
Just
And
out of curiosity, did you check her level of comfort before she told that and then after she told you that?
it was obvious. We can watch these changes happen. The tension leaves the body, the agitation leaves, the smile comes on the
Yeah.
face because, and this is a great tip for anyone working with people who are suffering from dementia, uh, that often the long-term memories are intact and accessible. And music also can be, a prompt for that too, and an anchor for that.
I particularly with when I'm working with Alzheimer's or any form of dementia, I do my best to find out what's their favorite music, and whether it's big band or Grateful Dead or country or whatever it is, I want that playing
Yes,
when I'm there and go to that space with them, of whether we're talking the 60s or the 40s or whatever it is. I want to create that environment, that space where they can shine.
it's perfect. And I have a sense that, for the people here who haven't met you, or maybe you're new to them, they're already picking up on what a warm and caring and compassionate man you are. How do you, what kind of self care do you indulge in to help move through these losses? I mean, hypnotherapy is an intimate relationship. And and while we have clients that come in and out of our lives and maybe we never see them again, we get kind of used to those short-term
Right.
relationships. But to lose a client to death is a it's that's a different experience. What do you do, Roger?
Well, and just further on that, there's this special intimacy, this and the relationship between you and I as hypnotherapists and the person that we're with that is at the end of life. It's just a whole different level of relationship that I don't necessarily have with somebody that's there before me for weight loss. It's a deeper intimacy, and so there is that bond, that relationship. And even with the one I was talking about in December, I saw her once, which ended up being 2 days before she passed. And she was in the hospital bed. I'm here in Palm Desert. She was there in LA. Um, there was a bond.
And
And
just because you're working remotely doesn't distance that, does it?
no, not at all. Not at all. It's just a whole different intimacy. And one of the beauties of that is I learned so much about living. It's one of the reasons why I love this work, is the person that's dying is teaching me how to live, and really focusing on what's so important. But to answer the question, when I have had a day of working with people at end of life, or have just received word that somebody passed, as soon as I can possibly get on my bike, I'm out on the road on my bike, riding fast and furious. I gotta let it go. So that's one way. When I'm with people in the session, you've heard me talk about this before, I hold a flow through experience.
Yeah, would you explain that, how you do that? I think that many of the people here would be interested in that because, sometimes this conversation comes up in our private hypnotic women's group, and often it's commented that, well, they have a bubble of protection around them to keep unnecessary negative energies from intruding. So let's hear your take.
Well, in grad school, when I was working on my master's in marriage family therapy, we were taught to surround and protect ourselves in white light. And that just seems so offensive to me, to create a barrier between you and me. And it's like, I just, hard as I tried, I'd say, oh, screw it and get rid of it. It was like, no. And something that I learned uh, from a Hawaiian tutu, a teacher, was the concept of flow through. In other words, I listen in the person before me, and they have their experience, and I allow that experience to come and be here with me and experience the best I can in the moment, and let it keep right on going. I have enough of my own crap. I don't need anybody else's. But I can be with them in the moment. I can hear their pain. I can experience their suffering and keep it right on going. I don't need to hang on to it. And so
Yeah.
that's before every session, I just create that image of flow through in that movement. And I try to hold that space in the session.
That's wonderful. And when I heard you first describe that, I decided I was going to do it too, and I have, and it works marvelously. And I think you're absolutely right. Our These clients that are coming to us, they're bearing their souls to us,
Yeah.
and they are not creating a block. They're actually in a position where they're ready and willing, and they want to cut through the bullshit. And so, to put up any kind of barrier to that, I think is really counterproductive. And people can feel it. Most of our communication is nonverbal. It's the energetic qualities that we're sharing, and then we can choose where that energy goes and how we choose to utilize that. And speaking of energy, a lot of people who are at end of life have a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help them process that or utilize that in a helpful way?
Well, often it's just starting by talking about it. What is that anger about? And what's the deeper emotion below the anger? Anger is, how I explained, anger is like fire. But below the fire, there's a deeper fuel, whether it's gas or oil or paper or wood or whatever it is. Below anger is hurt, fear, or sadness. And when somebody can identify the fear or the sadness or the hurt that they felt, then we can get down to letting go of that. And that's where I'll usually end up doing forgiveness work. And it's, I forgive myself for judging myself as angry. I
Mhm.
forgive myself for judging my dad as angry. Letting go of the judgment of it. And there's such a peace that comes about when people acknowledge, I was angry or I have anger,
Yeah.
and it's okay. I don't have to judge it.
I think that one of the most magical aspects of hypnosis is when we escort a client into rescripting things,
Mm-hmm.
or or often I'll take people to the multiverse, to the
Yep.
alternate parallel universe. When we think about end of lives, one of the things that people are worried about, upset about, is unfinished business. Excuse me. Those relationships that have gone awry, or worrying that maybe they uh, haven't finished some work, or they're not leaving their family in the right place. And so when we take them to these imaginary other places where they can have that experience of patching up a relationship, having a conversation, getting a glimpse into the future to see that their family's going to be just fine. They
Yeah.
will be missing them, but they'll be fine. Then their subconscious mind believes that that has happened, and all of the emotional content shifts. And so we get to be just as creative as we are with all of our other clients with end of life. And I think that this is where, we can really have fun with them,
Yeah.
because so many of them are not having fun. Maybe their bodies aren't allowing them to, or maybe their minds are just so enveloped in this idea of the end of their life happening, and all of the loss, that just to come to us and have some fun can be an amazing thing.
And it's in every single session, even with that woman in December, I try to find a moment where we can laugh,
Yeah.
where we can have a giggle. And um, she told me about a funny incident that had happened there in the hospital the day before.
Yeah.
And she started laughing, and it hurt to laugh. But and then when she stopped laughing, she said, "Oh, thank you for that. I needed to laugh." Yeah, just create that
It,
space.
it's so true. And yet sometimes they don't find anything humorous.
Yeah,
And so it's up to us to kind of find something that they can relate to. And one of my best stories that I tell people who've had hospital experiences, which a lot of these people have been in and out of the hospital, is from Wally Garland. You know Wally, he's
yep,
my ex-husband, and he has some hypnosis training. He went to HPTI, and he also has had some health challenges. And a few years ago, he had to be hospitalized, and he was pretty sick. And he was kind of in and out of it under medication. And all of a sudden, he heard someone yell out next to his bed, Code Brown, in room, whatever room he was in. And he thought, oh dear God, this is it. I'm dying. And that's the last thing he remembered until later when he came back to conscious awareness. I was greatly relieved to find out that he was still alive. And the nurse came in, and he said, oh, was it close? What happened? All I heard was Code Brown. And the nurse looked at him seriously and said, sir, you shit the bed. Bringing some levity to these serious,
yeah.
to the seriosity of being sick and ill and dying is important. And sometimes that's our role to to be doing that. And
And
we
and
know,
and also with grief, when
yeah,
when often I'll see people, the partner, after the person passes, and I ask them to tell me a funny story about the person and some
yeah,
experience that they had together, and we share a laugh. So we have tears together, we laugh together. Again,
that's, and you do have that bond with surviving family and friends. It's amazing. A young man taught me so much about end of life. This was 6 years ago, and his mother had worked with me for weight loss successfully, and so when she needed help, she reached out. Her son is 35 and had a brain tumor, and by the time I met him, he'd already received a few rounds of treatment, um, chemotherapy and radiation, and he was suffering from nausea side effects, and that was really our goal. And I worked with him for a number of sessions addressing that, but addressing some of the things we talked about. He didn't feel comfortable talking to his wife and his other family members about death. They were determined that he was going to survive.
okay,
And
yeah,
so none of that conversation was allowed. And he was a big strapping guy and had been married for a good number of years, no children. And over time, his situation worsened, and he started to have some mobility issues. And one day he didn't show up for a session. And I was worried about that. I called and left a message, and I didn't hear back from him till the next day when he called. and apologized for not showing up. He said that that night his wife had had terrible abdominal pain. They rushed her to the hospital where she gave birth to their daughter, and they didn't even know that
Oh,
she
wow.
was pregnant. Right. I don't know how this happens, but apparently it happens. And they call this kid the miracle child. She just had her 6th birthday. And unfortunately, her father died when she was about 3 months old from his cancer, from the brain tumor. But those 3 months were
Oh,
amazing.
I bet.
And during our work, he had named his brain tumor, and and he talked to it regularly. And but he came to terms. He came to a beautiful acceptance of what was happening in his life, and that the meaning that he had gone through the treatment, and at one point he had thought about quitting it. He even confided in me that he was considering suicide,
Hmm.
and that was right before his daughter was born. And what if, just what if, he hadn't had that safe place where he could air that fear, because we have many clients who consider that. Yeah, lots more people than you ever imagined think about it, right?
Yep.
And if they can't utter the words for fear that someone's going to haul them off to the loony bin, well, that's a sad thing. And the fact that he was able to talk to me about that, and I normalized his thoughts for him,
Good.
and I did ask that he would promise to call me first, and and he did. But he opted to live as long as he could, and because of that, he got to spend those months with his daughter, which was wonderful.
And I'm often involved in conversations about those compassionate choices of having that discussion about, should I stop eating, or should I drink the orange juice?
Right. And
And
again, we're not there to give advice. We're there to listen,
yep,
to that space for them to have these explorations. And I've even done the old fork in the road.
yep,
You want to try that on. You want to check out and see what that's going to feel like. Let's do it. And again, just keeping it completely open context so that
yep.
we're not making any suggestions to them as much as possible. Right? That's always a fine line. So Sheila has a question there. Is there an assessment or threshold that you use to determine whether you can or cannot hypnotize the person? Yeah, and talking about formal hypnosis, right? Because I know that you're like me, Roger. You do so much of your work in a conversational way, right? Where we're using um, NLP approaches, we're using conversation, presupposition, we're using nonverbals and utilizing theirs. But when it comes to formal hypnosis, and I think this is really relevant if there's expectation of that from a client.
Right.
So, how would you answer Sheila's question?
Well, I guess first of all, from my perspective, we're always in trance, we're never not. And I always say hypnosis is learning to take control of the trance that you're in. But I think to maybe better answer that would be to uh, a woman that I'm working with Alzheimer's. To have her sit down, shut up, and close her eyelids is not going to happen. But to have some country western music on in the room and engage her in conversation and have her tell me stories about life and me start weaving those stories back to her, and about self-care and about remembering to brush your own teeth, and remembering to go to the bathroom, and tell her stories about being able to go to bed at night and feel at peace, and to sleep soundly through the night. We have that dialogue, that conversation going.
Right.
And is she sitting there with her eyelids closed? No.
Mhm.
But yeah, and the results are powerful.
Right. And And I think that even for clients whose cognitive abilities are still quite intact, being creative and using narrative approach is wonderful. But I do a lot in the early part of my time with them to prime them
Yeah.
for some formal hypnosis. Simple things like an anchor collapse to reduce the physical pain or to reduce anxiety or, self-consciousness or whatever they may be demonstrating at that time is a great conduit into the more formal hypnosis. Or you and I use a form of self-hypnosis that we teach our clients based on that light switch
Yeah.
from Joy Kine, right? Where we're teaching them, I teach rhythmic breathing and then use the metaphor. So, under the guise of I'm going to teach you a tool that you can use, and then we simply segue from that. Okay, let's use this self hypnosis tool you just learned to begin to move into formal hypnosis. In here, we can use hypnosis for the ritual of ratifying whatever we've been priming earlier on in our conversations based on what they told us that they want. So there are ways to do this gracefully. We don't suddenly go uh, from this to this, which is where if people are going to sense resistance from a client, is because we're just taking too big a leap. We can move our way into that gracefully, and before they even know it, they're off somewhere else, right?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a woman that also with Alzheimer's, that early on with her, uh, established the anchor and she says it okay. It's my okay.
Yeah,
And it was a place of peace and relaxation for her. And as it turns out, what her husband just says when she's agitated, when she's upset, she has no idea what this is, but he says, show me you're okay.
perfect.
And she does that, and she just and starts smiling.
This is beautiful, and this is how we can include family members, caregivers in what we do. And it's so easy to teach them how to use this anchoring. And uh, Freddie Jacquin and I have a course on teaching parents how to be more effective with kids. And this is one of the components is that we can show people how to anchor helpful states at some point when the client is in a comfortable place, in a peaceful place, all they need to do is just do a gentle shoulder press, maybe. And then later, if they're distressed, if they're having pain, they can reactivate that and they can compound that every time. And I think it's just such an elegant way to empower those caregivers. Sometimes people who are in that transition phase really aren't able to grasp what we're telling them. They're locked into their pain. They're distracted by other things. And so using these kinesthetic things, I remember visiting a woman in the hospital who was in pretty dire straits and she was quite agitated and she had a really hard time following me. And so I just gently tapped on the top of her hand and I paced my voice with it. And she started to entrain with that. And so there are many ways that we can use touch. And, we're warned not to touch our clients. What do you think about that?
Well, what does touch mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Am I fondling them? No. If they ask if they can give me a hug at the end of the session, absolutely. Um, but if it's appropriate for me to touch their hand, I'll do that. If they're laying in bed in their home or their hospital and I'm there, I might lay my hand, my fingers, starting out maybe just a touch here, but often what I'll do is put my hand palm up, put them in control of where they can put their hand on mine.
That's a great tip. I love that. And often just holding the hand is so reassuring, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And so to give them that sense of control that they're the ones on top of the situation, metaphorically,
Yeah,
is very powerful.
yeah,
Thank you for
yeah.
that. I love that. So, sometimes for people that aren't really used to being around someone who is facing death's door, getting ready to meet the Grim Reaper, how whatever um, frame we use for it, they might not know what to say, or they might say the wrong things. Do you have any suggestions for us today?
Well, never ever say, I know how you feel, or you shouldn't feel that way.
Oh,
It's to me, it's much more about creating that safe space for them to share with me how they feel, and to ask very open-ended questions. And then I'll just tell them right up front, I can't imagine, what you're experiencing or what that was like for you. But I'm here to listen if you'd like to share that. And then it's the invitation, it's up to them as to where they go with that. But I don't ever try to tell them what it should or should not be like, which is often what their family and friends are doing.
yeah. I think also there's something that maps across from that is being, a family member or a friend that can also happen to us. And that is if we ask the question, how can I help you? Because they often don't know.
Yeah,
They may not know what the parameters of hypnosis is, and when a family or friend calls and says, "Oh, what can I do for you?" That person may not want to impose, or really they might be so consumed in the shock stage that they have no idea how this person could help. So in that case, is it appropriate to actually offer those solutions?
well, I'll often ask the question, do you know what would help you?
Okay.
And if they don't seem to know or don't know what's possible, then I'll talk about, well, sometimes people want help with pain control, or sometimes they want help with sleep, or they want to have peace of mind. Sometimes uh, we'll do a death rehearsal, but I'll offer the list of possibilities of where we go.
I love that. And part of our job is to help them prioritize how our time together is going to be spent. And we had a question here. Have either of you been asked to be present when the client has opted for medical assisted? And so Washington is a um, right to die state, and it's quite a process. I have not been asked to be present. I did have one client who opted for that, and we did some work ahead of time. And he had already made up his mind. He was determined that he was a cancer care client, and he'd had enough, and his family was on board. So I think, our sessions, I had worked with him through his treatment, and our final session was just for him to confirm that that was the right decision for him. And frankly, I don't really know a lot of what went on there. you know, I had him go and talk to his inner guides and within his own belief system, and he seemed to be quite satisfied. And I told him how much I had learned from him because these
Yeah,
clients teach us a lot, don't they?
they sure do. Yeah. I have not been present. I've had several people over the years, both in Washington and now here in California, that choose that option, and we work with it ahead of time. Uh, Everyone that I'm thinking of has created for themselves, when they chose the time was right, has created a very intimate private space, whether it's in their home or out in nature somewhere. And it's usually with family and friends, the people that are truly are loving with them. Um, And I can't think of a situation where they had the medical doctor or any other professional like myself present. Actually, I think of one person that had a hospice worker present because they kind of developed a mother-daughter relationship. But yeah,
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting the choices that these people make to have it be so private and intimate in that way too. I just have to comment that we have people all over the world joining us here today, and thank you, ladies, for being here. I
this
saw
is awesome.
Camilla is in Sweden and she's staying up late to be here. I want to bring up one other topic that's one of my favorites, and that's about sex and end of
Oh,
life.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember there was a conversation online a couple of years ago, and some people were appalled. They just thought that was repulsive and gross, and you know, and you and I feel completely differently about that. And what's your take on that?
Well, often what I find is that the partner is terrified of hurting the person and or thinking it would be selfish or whatever, that they wouldn't want to have sex, and is terrified of hurting the person, and is the one in resistance. And what I found is that frequently the person that is at the end of life wants that touch, wants that intimacy, wants that blissful experience, the joy, and touch is so important, and being in intimacy is so important.
Yeah, and I know that your perspective, because you do a lot of work on aging, with the older adult population, and
I've earned it.
yay. And so the truth is that even though the body ages, the spirit is still there, desire is there, and that desire for intimacy and connection, physical touch. And we live in a culture that doesn't really, embrace that. And in fact, in our work, we're we're warned, not to have any kind of invasive or unwelcome touch. And I respect that. I think that intention is everything, but getting permission is everything. When we're talking about clients who are missing that in their life, and maybe they don't have a partner, um, but they're still wanting intimacy and even sex. I mean, hey, sex by yourself can be
Hmm.
fun too.
Yeah.
And so, I mentioned my client with the prostate cancer, and that's his biggest loss is that, he doesn't have the function that he had before. And I think that working with these clients and letting them know that there's so many ways to experience that. And the greatest sex organ is right here, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most powerful one of all. And that they can create their own satisfying experiences within their own mind if that's all that's available.
And it's kind of related to this is also being open to work with LGBTQ issues. And I'm thinking of a man in his 80s who's been married for 60 some years, has kids, has great grandkids, and for the last 20 years has had a male lover on the side, and his wife and family do not know.
What a big secret to keep. That's a burden.
And he's getting to the end of life. He's in that transition phase, and he wants this man to be part of the end of his life and involved in his service, and is talking about whether or not he should introduce him to his wife and family.
And
And
so, what kind of approach do you take in this case? This is quite unique.
well, a lot of it's just
Maybe not.
listening. A lot of it's listening, but then also the fork on the road journey. And what if you tell them, and what might that be like? What if you don't tell them, what might that be like? And I don't know that he's come to a decision yet, but it's one we're working with.
At the very least, having that safe and non-judgmental place to explore
Yeah,
those answers is priceless. And I think really, one of the powers that we give is to remind people that they have choices, because people are often suffering when they think they have no choices,
yeah,
when they feel a sense of a lack of control. And there's nothing like, a life threatening illness or being at end of life to make you feel like you don't have control. So many aspects of life shut down. Like I mentioned with my father, he has macular degeneration, so his sight is limited. He's hard of hearing, that's limited. Now his physical mobility is limited due to energy restrictions. And so he's feeling like he's not controlling these events, but to be able to offer him choices, even
yeah,
in the simple aspects of life, gives him back that sense of control. And for the client that you're mentioning, I can imagine there are many choices available, and it's not just black or white, whether he's going
right.
to drop that on his family upon his death or not. There are many ways that he can address it, and what a wonderful thing to remind a client of. I think that's marvelous. So, yeah, what else do you think the hypnotist listening here today would need to know when they encounter someone who is dealing with end of life?
Well, mostly to not assume that they have the answer for their client, to also, I guess, boundary setting, I think, has become such an issue for folks. Um, that people are, the well-meaning neighbors and family and friends are showing up with casseroles, with hot dishes. And I don't know how many times I've heard, we do not have room in our refrigerator or freezer for another hot dish.
Yeah,
And you have to keep piling up. And the ongoing phone calls, how's she doing? How's he doing? And the stress that goes behind that for both the caregiver and the person. And to help them set boundaries, it's okay not to answer the phone. It's okay to hang a sign on the door, please, no more hot dishes. And then to also, often people do not know about opportunities like Caring Bridge, which is
tell us
an,
about that. That's a free resource.
yeah, Caring Bridge is a free resource. It's online. You establish your account, and either the person themselves or their caregiver, either on a daily basis or a weekly basis or whatever, does a report. How are we doing today? Here's the medical appointments. Here are our needs. We need to ride to the doctor on Wednesday. No more hot dishes. That type of thing. And people are instructed: do not call the house. Do not come knocking on the door. Go to Carrying Bridge, and you'll read all about it. And if you'd like to request a visit, there's an opportunity there where they can do that, and people have choice of, yeah, I do feel like having a guest today, or I don't. And
That's fantastic. I think that's such a wonderful solution for those boundary issues, because
it's so
the truth
empowering.
is, it's so empowering. And, some people just don't respect that.
Yeah,
You might have uh, people who are looking ahead towards a possible inheritance who decide to surface right during this stage of dying, that you want to go and make your face shown. And people are that callous and self-centered. So this would automatically filter them. I think that even, that Caring Bridge works for those logistics, but there is also something else that we discovered when we were doing our end of life training, and we put together our hypnosis certification course. And that was called the ring theory.
Oh
You
yeah.
remember the
Yep.
ring
Yep.
theory? This is great. And I think I've shared it in our group, but for the women that have missed it, it's probably in our files section there. And the ring theory is a set of concentric circles. And in the very center is the client, the patient. And the it's basically set up for kvetching. Kvetching is that Jewish term for complaining, grousing,
Right.
venting, any of that kind of any of that kind of energy flow. And it is to flow out. So and the next circle from the patient or the client would be immediate family members. And then the bigger circle from that would be close friends. And the bigger one from that would be acquaintances, I don't know where coworkers, the person gets to set who is the closest one in and how that radiates. And the rule is that anybody on the inside can only kvetch outward, and you're not allowed to kvetch inward. And I just love that flow. And it's a simple visual too, so that can be posted and shared with people who are in those varying circles. And I love that. And what a great reminder for ourselves. Where are we? Where are we on that person's circle? Now, sometimes we might be in close. We're having that intimate session, but sometimes we might get pushed out to the outside too, and we need to respect that.
I've have copies of the ring um, in a file drawer, and I have on several occasions pulled it out, handed it to them, and we fill it out. So they
Yes,
have
it's
that
fun.
visual reminder.
Yeah, and it's not, of course, reserved for people who are actually dying, but anyone who's going through a crisis in life.
Yep.
It could be great to use for someone who is grieving a death, right? It could be great for someone who is going through a divorce. So, or any, because losses come in many forms.
Yeah.
So Deborah asked, is Carrying Bridge an online site for everyone around the world?
Just yes. Well, I assume so. Google it, but I think it's worldwide.
Yeah, great. That's a great resource. I love it. And of course, as this end of life wave is going through our country and through other countries, there are more and more resources. I I ordered a set of the death deck cards, and I had that at HT Live. You and I had fun looking at them, and and these cards have a series of questions so that you can promote these conversations, because I think it's so important to talk about these things before we get into those phases, right? Before we have diagnoses or before we get so aged, and to be able to promote conversations. I just recently shared an article that said that millennials are much more comfortable talking
Yep.
about death, right? And I like to take some credit for that, because my three kids have always been encouraged to talk about anything, sometimes to my own dismay. Wow, they'll go everywhere. I remember I went to a death cafe event here in my town, and that's an interesting way to get in on these conversations. If you guys want to find something in your own area, just Google Death Cafe. They have a general site, and then
I
they'll have,
highly encourage them to do that.
it's wonderful. And one of the questions that was posed there is, if you had the opportunity to know the date of your death, would you take that? And at first, everyone in the room, almost I'd say 90% of people said, no way. But then with the ensuing conversation, people started to come over to my side. I did want to know. I wanted to know, and for various reasons. I'm not afraid of it. And I want to make sure that all the time I have left is just absolutely more meaningful.
Yeah.
And, of course, those of us that want to play with fate might want to change that date too. But I think these are the kinds of questions that are great,
Yeah.
and to have them in unexpected places like dinner or on the bus ride. I mean, how wonderful it is. And you get to really learn a lot about each other too with their responses.
I have both a
I,
death deck and hello, both decks.
oh,
And
yeah.
And
I got the death deck just from their website, and I think it's
it is,
thedeathdeck.com.
and they're
Yeah,
it's a two women that I've gotten to know that, and they're just great fun and wonderful, and it's just a great resource. But I've sat in a session with couples and hand them the deck, and they draw and ask each other the questions
yeah.
to get that
So,
conversation.
Roger, I have one more question for you because we're getting close to ending this wonderful webinar. Um, Rituals are really important, and we can do hypnotic rituals to help people. What kinds of ideas do you have for people who are at end of life or people who are grieving that can be helpful for them when it comes to a ritual?
Well, immediately what comes to mind is a woman. Um, I saw she and her husband together, and he just passed, and he wanted no memorial service, nothing, and he didn't want family or friends or no nothing, and that leaves her feeling empty, feeling something's missing, no sense of closure. And what I asked was, well, okay, so that's what he wanted, and he's no longer here. What do you want? And she said, I would love to bring my family and friends together and have that time to talk. And mostly she needed the permission to create that ritual where she could go do that, and it wasn't going against him. This is what she needs now,
Right.
and it's not about him, it's about her. And so what her assignment this week, because I'll be seeing her next week, was to come back with some ideas of what this ritual is going to look like. And she was laughing about, maybe we'll have a party, maybe we'll do it in the home, maybe we'll do it at his favorite bar. um, and so that's what she's coming back with, is some ideas of what she'd like to do.
And I think that's so important, that people who are needing that, who are feeling that things are unfinished, get a chance. And through rituals, historically, traditionally, have provided some of that transition that comes with death for people who are going through it or those that are still alive. And so to have some ideas for them, and you can find them just by Googling any rituals
Right.
for dying and grieving, and some of them are really creative. And I happen to believe that children need these,
Yeah.
and talking to children, in a way that they're going to be able to understand, and having honest conversations about death with children will certainly prevent lots of the confusion and fears that they end up having if they go to a funeral and they're told that grandpa's sleeping. You can imagine how problematic that can be for
Yeah.
them. They can even develop fears of sleeping themselves because grandpa never wakes up again or he disappears. And so, honest conversations that respect a person's belief systems, I think this is really, the basis of what we do. And we can operate from that point.
And also having rituals and room for grief around loss of a pet.
This is true. That's a whole nother, because to many of us, our pets are our children, aren't they?
And and when somebody who is not a dog owner or a pet owner is told that your dog died, that's too bad.
Yes, my daughter is a professional pet photographer, as you know, and one of her most rewarding aspects of her job is doing legacy photographs for animals that are in their last days.
Yeah.
And they've been absolutely phenomenal, and they're a healing experience for the owners of those animals too. So,
Yeah.
and then later they get this beautiful photograph, this image, and so that's very valuable. So thank you, Cynthia. Cynthia says this has been inspiring, but she wants more. Make a wonderful workshop. Yeah. Uh, Gee, when is the next workshop, Roger?
I don't know. Well, we need to get it scheduled, but our end of life class is available online.
Yes, we do have an end of life hypnosis for end of life certification course that we put together, and that's available. I have a link on my website, and then you have it on your website, Hypnosis
Health
for
info.
Health.
Well, actually, where they'll
Hypnosis.
really find it is at rogermooreinstitute.com.
Okay, I'm going to type that in there for them so that, yeah. And anybody who needs other contact information from you can find you on Facebook. Did I spell it right?
Yes,
Yep.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, or just go to Hypnosis Health Info.
Okay. Okay.
And
One last.
somebody had asked about Light Switch. Do you have resources for that?
Yes, I do. I can share that. It's in several of my books, but I'll share it. I actually have in a video of me demonstrating it on my YouTube channel. So what I'll do is share that in our Hypnotic Women group today, and I'll just
Okay.
reference so that they can see it. Okay, and Angela says she's preparing for a trip home and been considering how to bring up the topic because she's lost several family members this last year. And no, my mom wants to talk about it with the family. Oh, this is such a wonderful opportunity for you, Angela, to promote those conversations. And, I've found that using a little bit of a distant perspective can help. It can help people get a little more comfortable. We don't want to throw them into the deep end right away. But, you could even reference this webinar and say, wow, I learned some interesting things, for example, and then take some of the salient points out of it. And then that can lead its way into a more personal application. What do you think, Roger? What would make that conversation more palatable?
2 years ago, yesterday actually, um, my 97-year-old aunt died. And a few weeks later, I was sitting at the dining room table talking to my 96-year-old mom, telling her about the service and how my aunt, who was always the joke of the family, was she was the planner. And she had every moment of her memorial service scripted. Who was going to sing, what they were going to sing, who was going to talk. She had the pictures all picked out for the video. I mean, it was down to the T. The program was written, it was done. And we were laughing about that. And laughing from a place of love and just remembering her. And that just led very beautifully into, Mom, what do you want?
Perfect.
And we started talking, and she says, nobody's ever asked me that. And before we left that visit, we had 2 pages of notes written down, followed up by several weeks of phone call and checking, and even getting, she knew she did not want to be the minister, and I called the former minister of hers in Kansas, and he said I would love to come and do that for her.
Yeah.
And so it was just creating that space of what do you want?
You're so right. And it's like everything else we do, when we plant that seed, it germinates, it starts to grow, and pretty soon you'll get questions like, I wonder if I need to do some paperwork so that they don't go to extreme measures when I don't want to have my ribs broken for someone trying to
Right.
resuscitate me. And this is the time to do it when you're still cognitive, when we're still able to make these decisions, and so we can be a catalyst for them, and we can point them to resources, and we don't have to necessarily do that work for them, but we can certainly support them and answer those questions, because one question leads to another, and what does that do? It's empowering to them. So what a wonderful gift.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a marvelous get together with everybody. want to again thank you for joining us. And Roger, thank you so much. I love you, my friend, and
I
I
love you
love
too.
all the wonderful work that you're doing. And you can check out our websites for any information. As Roger said, that course that we offer is on his there. And we'll probably continue these conversations in our group and in other groups online. And that's a wonderful thing.
And thank you for your group, Kelly, and for inviting me and just creating the wonderful healing spaces that you create. Thank you.
It's marvelous to
And
hear.
and and also for being there for me when I need a voice on the way home to talk to.
Yeah, isn't this amazing? I love that, you know, we're all in this together.
Yeah,
It's so marvelous. It's a wonderful time to be in hypnosis, my
it
friends.
is. It
And
is.
I hope you all enjoy the rest of this beautiful weekend. And I will be sharing the replay for this if you want to visit again, or feel free to share it with others. And you can share it with men too. That's perfect. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.